Who am I?" Achilles' voice, once filled with pride and power, now trembled with confusion and fear. The greatest warrior of Greece, the slayer of Hector, the terror of Troy, now did not even remember his own name. The arrow that should have ended his life had instead stolen something far worse: his identity. In a dark cave beneath Mount Ida, surrounded by those who had once fought beside him, Achilles lay staring into the fire, lost in the void of his own forgotten past. Before we dive into this extraordinary chapter of Greek mythology, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. This is just the beginning of an epic journey filled with gods, betrayal, and the price of fate. Don't miss what happens next. The fateful battle. Outside the formidable walls of Troy, the midday sun shone down on the battlefield, casting a brilliant golden glow mixed with clouds of dust, stirred up by the hooves of horses and the feet of warriors. The clashing of swords echoed sharply, blending with the thunderous gallop of horses and the shouts of men fighting for honor and survival. The Greek army, led by Achilles, the greatest warrior in history, a man even the gods on Mount Olympus admired, was on the brink of final victory after 10 long years of besieging Troy. Achilles, with his golden hair flowing in the wind, moved through the battlefield like an unstoppable storm. His bronze armor gleamed under the sunlight, reflecting a dazzling brilliance, as if Helios himself were blessing him. Each step he took shook the ground. Each swing of his sword was a declaration of invincibility. The Trojan forces, though numerous and resilient, could not halt his advance. He was the embodiment of war, an unquenchable flame, a living symbol of strength and honor. But fate, like a fragile thread in the hands of the three fates, Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos, always finds a way to test even the greatest. From atop a watchtower in Troy, Prince Paris drew his bow, his cold eyes fixed on Achilles. Paris, the coward who had sparked the war through his love for Helen, was now granted deadly precision by the god Apollo. The arrow in his hand was not just a mortal weapon, but carried the will of the god of light. Apollo, once angered by Achilles' arrogance, had guided the arrow straight to Achilles' left heel, his only mortal weakness, where the divine protection of the river Styx did not reach. Achilles, charging into the heart of the Trojan ranks, was unaware of the impending danger. The arrow left the bowstring, slicing through the air with a sharp hiss. For a brief moment, time seemed to stand still. The crowd of warriors paused, their breaths held, and then the arrow struck Achilles' heel. A cry of agony escaped his lips, echoing across the battlefield. A sharp, unprecedented pain spread from his heel through his entire body. His once steady legs trembled, and Achilles fell, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. The Trojans erupted in triumphant cheers. "Achilles has fallen! The great Greek warrior is dead!" Their shouts thundered like a storm, drowning out the groans of the wounded. They surged forward, surrounding Achilles' body, ready to drag him back to the city as a prized trophy to display before the people of Troy. The Greeks, in panic and despair, could not believe their eyes. Achilles, whom they had thought invincible, now lay motionless on the ground, blood pooling darkly from his fatal wound. The air was thick with chaos, and it seemed that all hope for the Greeks had vanished. The intervention of Apollo. But fate is never so straightforward. On Mount Olympus, where the gods dwelled in palaces of cloud and gold, the battle below was watched with cold, curious eyes. Apollo, who had guided Paris' arrow to its target, suddenly felt a shift in his immortal heart. Achilles, with all his pride, courage, and skill, was more than just a mortal warrior. He was a symbol of perfection in war, a soul that even the gods had to respect. Apollo, the god of light, music, and truth, realized that Achilles' death at this moment would be a terrible waste. Perhaps he deserved a different fate, a chance to continue his story. In a sudden decision, Apollo raised his hand, and a radiant beam of light descended from the heavens, enveloping Achilles' body in a divine golden glow. The light, warm and powerful like the sun itself, seeped into his flesh, holding on to the last breath in his chest as it grew cold. Achilles did not die, but fell into a deep coma, his body cold, his heartbeat so faint it was nearly undetectable. The poison from Paris' arrow still coursed through his veins, but Apollo's light had stopped it from spreading, shielding his soul from the scythe of Thanatos. The Trojans, too absorbed in their perceived victory, did not notice the subtle change. They rushed forward, pulling Achilles' body toward the city walls, eager to parade him as a symbol of the Greeks' defeat. But amidst the chaos of the Greek forces, two figures watched with sharp, determined eyes. Automedon, Achilles' loyal charioteer, and Ajax, a mighty comrade whose strength nearly rivaled Achilles'. They did not believe Achilles was truly gone. Automedon, with eyes accustomed to every movement of Achilles, noticed a small but crucial detail. Achilles' finger twitched, a faint but undeniable sign of life. He turned to Ajax, whispering with a trembling yet hopeful voice, "He's not dead. Look, he's still alive." Ajax, though engulfed in grief, immediately understood the significance. They could not let Achilles fall into enemy hands, whether alive or dead. A bold plan quickly formed in their minds. The bold plan takes shape. In the midst of the battlefield's chaos, as the Trojans reveled in their victory, Automedon and Ajax acted swiftly. They plunged into the crowd, feigning grief and despair, shouting that they needed to take Achilles' body back to the Greek camp for a proper burial befitting a hero. The Trojans, drunk with joy, suspected nothing and allowed them to carry him away. But instead of heading to the Greek camp, the two warriors quietly diverted to a small abandoned tent near the battlefield, where the body of a fallen Trojan warrior lay, similar in build to Achilles. Time was their greatest enemy. Automedon, with nimble hands, removed Achilles' radiant bronze armor, forged by Hephaestus himself, adorned with intricate designs of waves and flames. He dressed the Trojan corpse in Achilles' armor, carefully adjusting every detail to ensure no one would notice the difference. Ajax, with his immense strength, lifted the real Achilles onto his shoulder, covering him with a thick black cloth to conceal his faint breaths and slight movements. They left the armored corpse in the tent, arranging it to look as though Achilles had died in his final agony. But their risky plan was not flawless. As they left the tent, a patrol of Trojan soldiers nearby sensed something amiss. "Why are they in such a hurry?" one soldier growled, drawing his sword. "Something's not right. After them!" The sound of hoofbeats rang out as a group of Trojans began to pursue Automedon and Ajax, who were now racing toward the distant forest, hoping to find refuge. The chase was tense. Ajax, though powerful, felt the weight of Achilles on his shoulder, while Automedon led the way through narrow, rugged paths where horses struggled to follow. The shouts of the Trojans echoed behind them, growing closer. An arrow whizzed past Automedon's head, embedding itself in a nearby tree, nearly causing him to stumble. "Hurry!" Ajax roared, his voice like thunder. But there seemed to be no escape. The Trojans had blocked every path out of the forest. In their moment of desperation, a strange wind blew through, carrying the scent of the sea and a gentle whisper of Hermes, the god who protects fugitives and clever thieves. A thick fog suddenly descended, enveloping the forest in a white, misty haze. The Trojans' eyes blurred, and they stumbled in the swirling wind, losing their sense of direction. Their shouts faded into the distance as Automedon and Ajax, guided by Hermes' invisible hand, continued their flight toward Mount Ida, the sacred mountain near Troy, where deep caves could shelter them. After a long and perilous journey, the two warriors finally reached a dark cave hidden beneath massive boulders. The air inside was tinged with a divine presence, as if the nymphs of the mountain were silently watching. Ajax gently laid Achilles on a flat rock, while Automedon lit a small fire to warm his cold body. They sat down, panting, their hearts filled with worry, but also with hope. The Arrival of Chiron. As the fire crackled, illuminating the rough stone walls of the cave, a tall figure stepped in from the shadows. It was Chiron, the immortal centaur, half man, half horse, with wise eyes and silver hair flowing in the gentle breeze. Chiron, who had taught Achilles everything from the art of combat to medicine, had sensed his former student's danger through his divine intuition. Without a word, he knelt beside Achilles, his rough yet gentle hands examining the wound on his heel. The wound was deep, still oozing small drops of blood, and the skin around it had begun to blacken from the poison of Paris's arrow. Chiron shook his head, his eyes reflecting regret. "You have been granted a second chance by the gods, Achilles," he said, his voice as somber as the wind through ancient forests. "But this wound will never fully heal. Your heel will forever be a reminder of your fragility, no matter how strong you are." Automedon and Ajax stood by, weary and anxious. They had fought with all their might to save Achilles, but now they realized that his survival came at a steep price. Achilles, the great warrior once thought invincible, now bore a permanent wound, a weakness he could neither hide nor overcome. Chiron took from his leather pouch rare herbs, grinding them in a stone mortar and mixing them with spring water from Mount Ida. He carefully bandaged Achilles' wound, whispering ancient prayers to soothe the pain and prevent the poison from spreading further. Achilles, though unconscious, groaned softly each time Chiron touched the wound, as if his soul were fighting to return from the brink of death. The awakening of Achilles. After many hours lost in darkness, Achilles finally opened his eyes. The faint light from the fire illuminated his pale face, highlighting his sharp features now etched with exhaustion. The pain from his heel flared intensely, causing him to groan hoarsely. He tried to sit up, but his weakened body refused to obey, and he fell back onto the rock, his breathing labored. Where am I?" Achilles whispered, his voice faint and trembling. He looked around the cave, his eyes cloudy and confused, not recognizing the stone walls or the flickering fire. Automedon rushed to his side, supporting his shoulder, his voice filled with concern. "You're safe now, Achilles. We brought you away from the battlefield. You were struck by an arrow, but you survived." Achilles frowned, trying to search his mind for memories. "The battlefield. I was fighting." He paused, his gaze blank and bewildered. "Troy. I remember the sunlight, the sound of swords. And then, what happened next?" He shook his head as if trying to dispel a nightmare. "I don't remember anything. What did I do? Why am I here?" Chiron stepped forward, placing a hand on Achilles' shoulder, his eyes thoughtful but kind. "You were struck by an arrow, Achilles," he explained, his voice slow and steady, like a stream flowing over stones. "An arrow aimed at your heel, your only weakness. The gods intervened, and you were saved. But the shock from the wound, the poison, and the divine intervention may have caused your memory to fade." Achilles looked down at his bandaged heel, then back up at Chiron, Automedon, and Ajax. I don't remember anything," he repeated, his voice now tinged with despair. "Who am I? Who are you?" Confusion flooded his eyes, and for the first time in his life, Achilles felt weak. Not just physically, but mentally. He, who had once been the terror of Troy, now did not know who he was, could not recall his glorious deeds or his vows of honor. Chiron sighed, knowing that Achilles' recovery would not only be physical, but also spiritual. "You are Achilles, the greatest warrior of Greece," he said, his voice warm like a comforting balm. "And you will remember, but not now. Rest, Achilles. Your fate is not yet sealed." Achilles nodded weakly, his eyes blurring with exhaustion and confusion. Though he remembered nothing, he felt a small flame still burning in his chest, a vague sense that he had a mission, a vow to fulfill. He closed his eyes, sinking into a deep sleep, while Chiron, Automedon, and Ajax quietly kept watch, waiting for the day he would recover. Achilles' path has only just begun. What will he do when the past he no longer remembers comes back to find him? Will he reclaim his destiny, or forge a new one?